how does the intention of the agents, that goes back to definition of institutionalized persuasion, how does the intention affect the definition? In other words, well, they're trying to help, so they weren't abusing, it was an accident. They were trying to help this person. Well, according to the definition of psychological abuse, and that article that definition came from, the intention of the person in power has no bearing on the definition of abuse. Good intentions don't have any bearing. So I ask it as a question, but I mean it as a statement. Yes. But I think it's something that we have to address. How does consent to treatment, how well does consent to treatment prevent abuse? Again, that goes into the importance of defining abuse. What is the criteria for assessing the degree of coercion that can be justified? Right now, there is no criteria for assessing the degree of coercion that can be justified. Like I said, in scientific literature, I can't find anything that talks about safe levels of coercion. How can we, how can there be a criteria when there's not even, it's just not on the radar? How might regulation help develop intentionality around the use of this technology? I'm not saying there's a safe way to abuse people. I'm saying there's a technology at work. It's been at work at least since the 1960s in reforming delinquent adolescents. This technology has not been identified as a technology. It's been unregulated, and it's being used. And this goes back into the indigenous societies. Subjecting people to pain is different from abuse. How can we, as we understand this, how can we insist that people applying this technology understand the disastrous potential in using that technology? What are the ethics of indoctrinating youth? In other words, how much right do we have to force someone to be good? I guess I mean that as a philosophical question. I think the validity of the culture that you're trying to indoctrinate or socialize a child into has some bearing on how much right you have to use coercion. That's a big philosophical statement. I'm going to go to the next question. How can we develop terminology, definition, and ethics? How can this knowledge be used to improve quality of care? How do corporate, industrial, fundamentalist values influence society's tolerance of injustice, abuse, and torture? How else does institutionalized persuasion manifest? What is the relationship between persuasion and growth? How can we develop a measurement scale that assesses the web of dynamics, the overall coercive stress, and the potential for harm? I can't remember if I have another slide after this or not. Oh, I do. I have conclusions, of course. We can go back to the questions if you want to, or we can talk about them online starting on Monday. There is a lack of widely accepted terminology capable of describing the complexity of the possible experiences in the multidimensional web of dynamics. In other words, we don't really have words that describe the complex psychological abuse. If you remember in the definition of psychological abuse, one of them is complex abuse, how they all work together. Here we have this web, I'm resorting to trying to convey it through art because I don't have words. This lack of terminology and understanding have contributed to the inappropriate use of institutionalized persuasion. The technology has evolved faster than our ability to make ethical decisions about its use. That's a profound statement that I stole from a congressional report on behavior modification. Congressman Irwin, I think his name was Irwin, basically said that, and that was in the 1970s. He said, the ability to control people through inflicting stress, it's, behavioral psychology, the field of behavioral psychology has grown by leaps and bounds and raised these ethical questions nobody's really started to answer still. Identifying the root causes of abuse in settings of institutionalized persuasion requires an understanding of the origins, the history, the evolution, the essential ingredients, and the tendencies of these social systems. To be effective in the prevention of abuse, we must be able to predict where and understand why the compounded root causes are likely to occur. So again, when there's a problem, jumping to a solution doesn't solve the problem. It's just a reaction. A reaction is not based on what's going on. A reaction is based on what we want to happen. So until we really understand what's going on, we're going to be shooting in the dark. So that's the point of all this research, is try to understand the system in the systematic